Good morning. Today is Tuesday, December 31st, 2024. On Sunday, President Jimmy Carter passed away at the age of 100. For many years, many Jews, American Jews, Israeli Jews, have attacked and criticized Jimmy Carter as a foe of Israel, as being anti-Israel, or even worse, as being an antisemite. So, I want to state very clearly the basis for those feelings, but at the outset, I need to say that those terms are incorrect and hysterical. The problem began at the beginning of his presidency, 1977, when he made it clear that he was willing to devote significant political capital to try to bring peace to the Mideast, to Israel and its neighbors. And he was the first U.S. president to mention the need for a Palestinian homeland. So let's be clear, the idea of a Palestinian state in modern terms starts with Jimmy Carter in 1977 and became the official American policy for both Democratic and Republican presidents for decades. Now, earlier that month, the New York Times had published an editorial titled "The Jews and Jimmy Carter," and they said that most leaders of the Jewish community are acting as if President Carter is risking Israel's survival for an illusory Middle East settlement. I understand that position. I certainly understand that in the present context, that is not a viable solution. But in general, over the years, many American presidents, administrations, and for decades, the majority of Israelis agreed with that principle. Now, American Jews were upset with President Carter because he tried to put pressure on Prime Minister Menachem Begin to limit the settlements. And one of his advisors, David Rubenstein, wrote, "Ever since 1948, the Jewish American community thought it was their job to support Israel 99%. You just don't criticize the Israeli government." And then along comes Menachem Begin. And here you had the President Carter, trying to get the Israeli government to do things that they did not want to do, like stop the settlements. Now, this is Rubenstein writing. Now, I think Carter was right. That's Rubenstein. But many in the Jewish community came to believe that Carter was just anti-Israel. In 1978, against the advice of his advisors, and with all kinds of domestic problems going on in the United States, President Carter invited then Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to the presidential retreat Camp David near Washington. And just remember that at this time, Carter's approval rating was at an all-time low. Neither Begin nor Sadat seemed inclined for the kind of agreement that Carter had in mind, but they came. Listen, please, to the words of Aharon Barak, who was there. He was a longtime Chief Justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, and he was a former chief advisor to Menachem Begin. Listen to what he said. Carter was the hero of Camp David. We were sitting, I think, 8 or 9 days together. We ate, we did a prayer, we thought of problems, and we would sit until late at night. Which other president of the United States would be willing to do that? Carter's plan at Camp David in 1978 led to the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab nation. It radically changed the landscape of the Middle East, diminishing, not removing, but diminishing greatly, for the first time in Israel's history, the threat of regional war with Egypt. And as we can see today, although that peace treaty is not perfect, but today especially we can see tremendous benefits that have come as a result of that peace treaty. Over 13 days, Carter personally authored 23 drafts of the accord and negotiated separately with both sides after it became clear they could not reach an agreement directly. And only at the end, Carter breathed a sigh of relief and said to Menachem Begin, "What we have achieved up till now is no less than a miracle. The hand of God is in what has been achieved." The Camp David Accords shattered the entire consensus which had existed up until that time that maintained that there was no chance of long-term ceasefire between between Israel and any Arab nations. And it took another 16 years before Israel signed its next peace deal with neighboring Jordan, which also is not perfect, but has been tremendously helpful, especially this year. President Carter gathered the leaders of Egypt and Israel on the south lawn of the White House on March 26, 1979, to sign a peace treaty ending more than 3 decades of war and hostility between the two Middle East rivals. With some 1,500 people looking on, the grinning president joined President Anwar el-Sadat of Egypt and Prime Minister Menachem Begin of Israel in that famous three-way handshake. It was one of the most indelible moments of the Carter presidency. I'm reading from an article in the New York Times by Peter Baker. The culmination of an arduous and daring diplomatic venture punctuated the previous fall during a marathon 13-day negotiation at Camp David that nearly fell apart, but for Carter's refusal to let it happen. At the South Lawn ceremony, Mr. Sadat called the president, President Carter, the unknown soldier of the peacemaking effort, to which Mr. Begin agreed, but as usual with an amendment, adding that Mr. Carter's achievement would be remembered and recorded by generations to come. Now, there was backlash from those who considered Carter irrevocably hostile to Israel. Carter himself rejected that characterization, explaining that he was just as invested in Israel's future and peace in Israel as they were. The greatest commitment in my life has been trying to bring peace to Israel. He said this in 2006. Israel, now this is his opinion, Israel will never have peace until they agree to withdraw from the occupied territories. And for the next 40 years, Carter insisted that Israel's settlements were the key obstacle to peace. Now again, that is an opinion that does not find favor today, but it is an opinion that was official American policy for decades, and hell was the opinion of a majority of Jews for decades, up until recently. In 2006, and this is very controversial, and I don't want to be apologetic about it. In 2006, he published a best-selling book with a provocative title, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. The book was written as yet another warning that Israel could become a less than democratic state if it did not find a way to end the occupation of Palestinian territories. And that problem, by the way, forget about the language used, but that problem exists up until today. But in the eyes of many Jewish Americans, this was a former president interfering in the decisions of Israeli leaders to do what they thought was necessary for Israeli security. Something that we have certainly seen during the past year. From there, it was a short path to accusing him of being a Jew hater, but that's just wrong, and it's unfair. Abe Foxman, who certainly has an important voice, said the title of the book, the choosing of those words to title his book, is to delegitimize Israel. Not necessarily the content, but the title, the choice of that word, apartheid, in the title. He's provoking, he's outrageous. In 2009, Carter released a letter labeled as Al-Khat, a prayer of atonement for the words he used that stigmatized Israel. Now, Carter's administration was complicated in many areas. There were many problems, double-digit inflation, the hostage crisis in Iran, although recent reporting has shown that it was actually Americans, perhaps working for Ronald Reagan, who sabotaged Carter's efforts to end the Iranian crisis until just after Reagan was elected. And when he lost, he spent the rest of his life in a position of renewal. In 1982, he and his wife Rosalind founded the Carter Center, the first of its kind base of operations, asserting themselves as international peacemakers and champions of democracy, public health, and human rights. The work included easing nuclear tension in North and South Korea, helping to avert a U.S. invasion of Haiti, negotiating ceasefires in Bosnia and Sudan. By 2022, the Carter Center had declared at least 113 elections in Latin America, Asia, and Africa to be free of fraudulence. And they devoted considerable attention to eradicating disease in developing countries, such as trachoma, a blinding disease that often torments women in rural Africa. And the truth is that there is a 15-minute operation that would help these women. And the Carter Center saw to hundreds of thousands of these operations, saving these women's sight. More than half of the surgeries that were needed in the entire country of Ethiopia were saved by the work of the Carter Center. And everything that Jimmy Carter did, he did hands-on. In 1984, the Carters got involved in a well-publicized venture, Habitat for Humanity. You may know about this. But the Carters didn't just support it. They worked with hammers and saws to build houses for the poor. And as of 2019, the former president had helped to renovate nearly 4,400 homes in 14 countries with his own hands. Another health effort he launched to eliminate the guinea worm in Africa, a disease that afflicted 3.5 million people a year. This past year, it's only been detected 7 times. At the heart of Mr. Carter's post-presidency was his ambition to be a peacemaker. In 1989, he led a team to monitor the elections in Panama and denounced them as fraudulent. He monitored elections in Nicaragua that resulted in the ouster of the Sandinista government. He parachuted into troubled areas as an election observer. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his untiring effort to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts, to advance democracy and human rights, and to promote economic and social development. And on Sunday mornings, he would preach in his church in Plains, Georgia. People would come from all over the country to hear him. And one morning, the lesson was about being friendly to your neighbors. And Carter said, you just have to reach out to them. Take a boy to a ball game or something like that, nothing big. That's what I think would make America a better country and would make you a better person. But in the 4 decades after he left the White House, Mr. Carter became known for how strikingly accessible he was. He greeted fellow passengers on commercial air flights. He hammered together with other volunteers building homes. He mowed the church lawn. He lived in the simple house that he had originally bought decades ago in Plains, Georgia. In 2010, he wrote a book about his presidency titled White House Diary. And in it, he quoted the words of his vice president, Walter Mondale, as a summing up of his presidency, with wins and losses, triumphs, defeats. He wrote, "We obeyed the law, we told the truth, and we kept the peace." I don't agree with the stridency and choice of words President Carter used later in life about Israel. But he was not an anti-Semite. And he loved Israel and wanted nothing more than peace there. And again, I'll just repeat this. Remember, his view of reducing the settlements, and just keep this in mind, during his presidency, the number of Israelis in settlements in the West Bank was 5,000. It is now 700,000. And the idea of a Palestinian state, while today looks far, far away, but this was the opinion of the majority of Israel for decades, and still the opinion of many. But here's what I will insist on. Minds, legitimate opinions can disagree about that. But this, I think, is undisputed. What he did with Egypt was historic for all time, especially now. And all Jews, all Israelis, owe President Jimmy Carter a debt of gratitude. And his work after his presidency is just magnificent. The image of a truly great American, showing us a person who loved people and wanted to help with his own hands in whatever way he could. We obeyed the law, we told the truth, and we kept the peace. President Jimmy Carter, rest in peace.